Hello, my name is Roger Martella. I am an attorney with the law firm Sidley Austin based in Washington, D.C., and the former General Counsel of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and here today in my capacity as a Vice Chair of the International Bar Association's Climate Change, Justice, and Human Rights Task Force. And I'm most honored and humbled to be with President Calderon, one of the leaders in the world on climate change and justice issues. And President, thank you for taking the time to come to New York today to be able to have this conversation and share your thoughts with our audience of members of the International Bar Association and even a broader audience that I'm sure will be looking forward to hearing your views on these subjects.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure. Let me say hello to all the members of the bar around the globe.
Okay, thank you. We're honored and thrilled that you took the time from your schedule to be with us. And we're sitting here in New York today in a very busy place at a busy time.
Yeah.
We're just a few blocks away from the United Nations, where they're kicking off Climate Week. Just last week, you released your own report on climate change and economic development. And of course, just today, the International Bar Association released our report on climate change and justice and human rights issues. So I want to focus today on these three topics: the policies of climate change, the economics of climate change, and the legal aspects regarding climate change, if that sounds okay.
That's great.
With you. But I want to thank you again and acknowledge how honored and humbled we are that you would participate with us. We do think of you as one of the top leaders in the world in being a proponent of taking action to address climate change and one of the most credible voices on the topic. As President of Mexico, you were known as a fighter for social justice, and a head of state at a time when other people were not talking about climate change, someone who enacted Mexico's first law on climate change, who took the lead in the Cancun negotiations, and while the world was turning away from the issue, stayed resilient and focused on it. You've continued that focus since you've left the presidency, and you now chair the Global Commission on Economic and Climate. I want to begin by asking you, why this interest in climate change? What was it that led you to take such a strong interest in it, and what's been your motivation for focusing on it?
Well, it was a long time ago when I was a child, honestly. And I listened by first time ever on a speech of my father, actually in a political convention in my own party. And suddenly, unexpected, he started to talk about the possibility that the poles could start to be melted, and the acid rain in some places, and the global warming. He was talking about a very recent, at that time, report of Club of Rome, in the sense that this group of scientists were talking that two gaps were threatening the humankind. The gap between the north and the south, the rich and poor, and the gap between the man and nature. And the conclusions of the Club de Rome's report at that time is we need to close both gaps at the same time. Let me tell you that some friends of my father was already an old man at that time, say, well, poor Luis, he's becoming crazy, he has some health problems, what's happening with him? But I was very impressed about his opinion at that time, and started to research a little bit. And all this year, I'm talking about early 80s, even late 70s.
This was way ahead of the curve.
Very far away, honestly. But I started to track all the things he said that afternoon. He passed away almost 25 years ago. But that's the way in which I became very involved. And he showed me how to be involved with the planet, in the sense that we need to take care about our fellow citizens or human beings, but also to take care about creation. That's the way in which I started to work in this. But roughly, that's it.
As President of Mexico, you had a lot of complicated issues, from drug cartels to trade issues to social reform, but you were always focused on climate change as a major part of your agenda. What did you see as some of the risks that a country like Mexico was facing, and why do you see such a need for action?
Well, several. First, yes, I had a lot of challenges ahead. I would tell you that one of my most important priorities is to make Mexico a real rule of law state. Because I really believe that one of the big differences between developed and developing countries is the level of enforcement of the law. The day in which countries like Mexico becomes real rule of law states, that day the real progress will start in our countries. That's one point. The other is, of course, among my priorities were social inequality, facing that with providing social opportunities for equal education and health services, competitiveness to the economy, and the other was exactly this, the sustainable development. Now, according with that, I started to put in place several public policies in the country. For instance, one of the easiest things that we can do is saving energy, which is good for the environment and it's good, very good for your pocket. So if you are able to reduce the consumption in your own house, in your office, in your any plant, industrial plant, whatever, you will save a lot of money and you will save a lot of energy, you will save a lot of carbon emissions. It's a win-win situation. We say those are the long-term fruits that you can take. So in that sense, I started, even in the middle of the recession in Mexico, a program in order to substitute old appliances for new appliances. Let me tell you, probably we are, I don't know, when we were married, with our wives, when we were married, probably the refrigerator we bought at that time probably was a fancy and very good one, but 10 years ago, those equipment were consuming 3 times the electricity that the new refrigerators are consuming today. So only by replacing those appliances, you can save energy and money and carbon emissions. So I started a very ambitious program in the sense that we detected the poorest families through the electric bill of them. So we provide, in the extreme cases, some kind of subsidy for down payment for a new refrigerator and an affordable credit to substitute them. And a company went to some house to take the old one, to replace them for a new one. The program had at that time a very boring name, like a program for substitution of appliances in order to save energy, whatever. I said, no, it's too boring. We are not going to advance in any way with that. So I suggested to the Secretary of Energy at the time, well, change the name. What about if we call this way? We in Mexico, our wives call us, the husband, as mi viejo, or my old man, or my old one. So what about this name? Change your old one for a new one. No? Cambia tu viejo por uno nuevo. It was a tremendous success. So we allocated like almost 2 million refrigerators or air conditioning equipment. So we save a lot of energy, a lot of money, a lot of carbon emissions. The same with the old lamps, for instance, with, I don't know, 60 or 80 watts each one. You can substitute for 15, 12, or even less watts lamps. The saving energy lamps, we allocated like 44 million, which is the largest program in the world. And we started with a very ambitious program from zero in wind energy. And now Mexico has almost like 2,000 megawatts in wind energy with a rate of productivity among the highest in the world, 42% of efficiency. So, and of course, we increased the level of treatment of water in Mexico from 30% to almost 60%, and with a clear path in order to reach 100% of treatment in Mexico. We reduced the rate of deforestation from probably 350,000 hectares a year, which was the average in the last decade of last century, to probably 150,000 a year, and in a clear path again to reach zero deforestation. So we did our best. We proposed and established the first law in order to establish clear commitments to carbon emission reductions. In 2012, my last year in office, we reduced effectively, by first time ever, the carbon emissions in Mexico. And we were the first developing country that established unilaterally a program to reduce carbon emissions. So I believe in that. I believe it's about the future. And why? Because Mexico, as other countries in the developing world, is one that suffered the most the consequences of climate change and will suffer even more. Just last week, a terrible hurricane destroyed a very important part of Los Cabos, this famous resort in Mexico. And the poorest families are suffering the most because they are living beside the rivers, for instance. They have not such big and strong constructions in their houses. So they are suffering the most, and we need to spend millions or even billions a year to rebuild roads and everything like that. Why? Mexico is in the intertropical zone, which is the zone for hurricanes or typhoons. You know, the typhoon in Philippines has killed 6,000 people last year. And the slope in the hills in Mexico is on average like 15 degrees, which is, so that exacerbates the consequences of climate events. I'm not telling that this specific hurricane is a direct consequence of climate change, but it is the kind of events that we will see in the future if we follow this terrible trend that could reach up 4 Celsius degrees at the end of this century.
Well, you've talked about being interested in the rule of law, and you are a lawyer. Our Climate Change, Justice, and Human Rights report concludes that there are existing mechanisms already in the law that could be the basis for nations to take action, drawing analogies to human rights legal regimes and human rights forums. What's your opinion on the availability of existing laws to be able to take action internationally to address climate change, and where do you see some need for reform or for more action?
Well, in the traditional law, it's quite interesting to see how the damages that one person could cause to a third one. And there is when the lawyers, we have like a role to play, which is to call for the payment of those damages. Could be something associated with the externalities in the economy. So it is not enough that you to say you have the right to pollute. If you damage somebody else's house, or you damage the health of somebody else, you need to pay for that. So paying for polluting, in this case, through the effort of the lawyers, I think is the right way to do it. Now, is that enough to tackle the problems associated with that? Probably not, because in the real world, there are a lot of collateral damages that pollution and global warming is causing that are not even considered currently under the law unfairly. For instance, what could be the size of the damage caused by coal pollution? We are estimating that the damage related with air pollution could be roughly like 4% of GDP in the world, and in some cases, like China, could be even 10% of GDP a year. Of course, you can say, well, it's too much or not, but nobody is considering what are the damages for health, for instance, in terms of respiratory diseases in those cities, or cancer in those cities. Nobody knows. We are estimated that almost 4 million people a year have premature death before air pollution in the world. Different sources, but the problem is exactly the same. And all those things is very difficult to consider in case by case solution, which is the activity of the lawyers. So all my points is to say we need more general law that could capture the necessity to regulate that. And one interesting thing to do so is through considering the human right to have the right environment to live. It's quite important and interesting what you are doing in that field.
Well, thank you for that. And one of the things we hear from countries who are unwilling to take action on climate change is they say climate change is a global issue. No one country can solve the problem. So until we have international legal regimes in place, we're not going to step forward and do anything. Unlike you in Mexico, you took initiative on your own. how do you feel about the need for countries and other organizations to work together sooner with existing legal mechanisms, or to what extent should we be putting focus on developing new treaties, new binding legal commitments, or should we be doing both simultaneously?
Well, we need to do both. We need to, yes, we need global agreements, binding commitments at global level. I believe in the international law, or in the sense that we can get international obligations coming from treaties, but at the same time, each single country, or even each single company, or each single person could do something to fix this problem. Because this attitude saying it's a global problem is like saying it's somebody else's problem, and it is not. It's our problem, and it is our responsibility to save our common house. Now, what kind of treaties we can make? Everybody was talking about binding agreements before Cancun, but probably I would say something like a capital sin for lawyers. But at international level, my learning is that at the end, almost any single obligations under the international law is not so binding in the sense that anyone could denounce a treaty and withdraw his or her sign from it, and that's it. No? So how binding was that? And at the same time, in this era of information and full disclosures to the public about a lot of things, with reputational risk, a lot of unilateral commitment are becoming as mandatory commitment, no? Because I say publicly something, and you are recording me. It's not exactly like a legal obligation to me, but it's going to be very, I will have a lot of pressure to deliver what I'm saying right now, no? The same a lot of countries that they say, well, I don't want to sign like a binding commitment. We can say it's unfair, but at least establish your own unilateral commitment. And I'm talking about China or India or Mexico, several countries. Now, under the mechanism of Cancun, those countries have already unilateral commitments. And the thing is, under that mechanism, we are committing more than twice carbon emission reduction that the carbon emission reduction that were committed under the Kyoto Protocol. So it's working a different way to make this kind of agreements. Now, under the internal law of each country, of course, it is needed to do something. We cannot wait the action of somebody else. We need to act unilaterally if that is necessary, and that's the thing we did in Mexico. And others are following us, and that's good. I think it's the way to do it.
Well, you have been a leader in talking about the economics of climate change and saying that economies can grow while they're taking actions like you took in Mexico to address greenhouse gases. We're here for the week of Climate Week, where the UN's debating policy. Where does the law come into play in having a role to address climate change and reducing greenhouse gases? Is it an essential element to this, or is the policy and economics going to move forward regardless of the legal frameworks?
Well, one of the recommendations we have in the Commission is to create the environment to reach this agreement at global level. We are talking about law, international law. But, as I was saying, there are a lot of things related with the consequences of climate change or the consequences of pollution in the environment that are not captured by the current law in an appropriate way. The example of air pollution is really clear. The consequences to health in human beings, for instance, or the consequences for the lack of productivity according with the people that could not attend a work or whatever, the consequences for tourism even are not estimated. However, if we establish through the law a clear framework about what is right and what is wrong about environment, which at the very end, as you were saying, it's a human right, good environment, we can clarify and provide certainty to the people and to the firms. And that's quite an important point that we are emphasizing in our report. There are some elements that could provide not only carbon emission reductions, but also economic benefits. And one of these, let me emphasize as a lawyer, is certainty. If we can provide the new legal framework that is needed to the world, instead to do that in the year 2050 with a lot of problems over us and probably too late, if we can provide a new legal framework, a lot of firms could invest directly and quickly in the new rules of the new kind of investments we need. Let me say, a lot of companies, for instance, right now are like hedging themselves, investing part in great investment and investing part in green investment, because they are not looking at clear action coming from the governments or congresses, in the sense that, well, what should I do? However, if we decided today that this is the right way to grow, those firms will say, okay, this is the way to do, let's go for it, because they want to be the big winners of the first movers. So it is possible to provide certainty, and with certainty, in legal terms, and with certainty, you will foster the investment that creates jobs and economic growth. A second topic is, through the law and through new rules and clear political incentives and economic incentives, clear signals to the market, you can improve, for instance, the competitiveness of natural resources. Always we talk about the competitiveness of labor or the competitiveness of capital, and that's true. Those are factors of production. However, the third factor that we are not considering is natural resources. And if you are not pricing correctly natural resources, you are generating a lot of inefficiencies that are hurting the economic performance. If you increase the efficiency of natural resources through market signals as prices, you will increase the competitiveness of the whole economy. And the other is innovation. Through the law, you can provide signals that promote the right research and development and cancel the ground economic activity. For instance, fossil fuel subsidies. We are subsidizing like with 600 billion a year fossil fuel subsidies. In other words, we are paying for polluting, gasoline and others. What about if you cancel, even gradually, fossil fuel subsidies in order to allocate those public resources to other things, either health systems or education or law enforcement agencies, or to promote renewable energy, for instance, or research and development? That is feasible and possible. But providing that clear signal, you will boost the innovation, and innovation in history, it's a key driver, again, for economic growth, not only to reduce the emission. Look what is happening in Europe. 20 years ago, Europe established the first rules related with renewable energy, for instance, or established higher prices in gasoline. What is happening is that the price of solar energy, for instance, went down by 90%. A photovoltaic cell today is only 10%, the cost of that is 10% the cost that it was like 15 years ago. Even 5 years ago, it's like 60% less. And that is through the legal framework that we are proposing to have, that could incentivize innovation, and through innovation will foster the economic growth.
So where do you think we're at right now in terms of having the proper legal mechanism in place? Is the law where it needs to be to facilitate these solutions? Is there more work to be done? Is it something of a hindrance to achieving the policy goals that you're working on?
No, definitely not. At global level, we are really, really behind what is needed. And we are running out of time, honestly. We have the window of opportunities closing very fast. Currently today, we are in the path to have 4 Celsius degrees at the end of this century. So it's urgent to take actions, and one action could be the global agreement. But even without global agreements, if we can establish in our countries a regulation to provide these clear signals to the market, this certainty for investors and consumers and producers, these rules about our planet, we can advance a lot on that.
Right now, you're addressing an audience of the top international lawyers from virtually everywhere in the world. What would you ask them to do? These are people who want to help and to play a role as well in their countries, and what can they do as lawyers to put into place some of the legal mechanisms that you would like to see?
Well, I would say that first, help us to design the right law, because I know that we can make mistakes writing the law. We can make mistakes as long as we are adapting to a new reality. So we need very good laws to provide common good for our people. Second, and probably most important, get involved in these issues. If you can read the report, it would be important to understand that it is not correct to say that taking action on climate change, being responsible with the environment and the future of children, of our children and grandchildren, will hurt economic growth. It is possible to have economic growth and tackling climate change at the same time. Yes, we need to choose right now a different path of growth, but it is possible to get jobs and economic growth being responsible. If we are going to invest, we are estimating $90 trillion in 15 years, either in urban development, energy, or land uses. Let's do the right way, not in high carbon economies, but in low carbon economies. That is possible. And the cost that is really marginal to do that. And even though it will be clearly offset very quickly with saving money, with the money we were able to save, with the innovation processes and so on. So help us to do the right thing and help us to move societies and governments to take action, be responsible, and of course to provide to the societies the good law that any lawyer should be committed with.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. We commend you for the work you've done to promote climate change issues and promote ways to address climate change while growing the economy of both developing nations and developed nations. Even though we've finalized the Climate Change Justice and Human Rights Task Force report, the work is not ending. These are recommendations that we are now going to be turning to an implementation phase. And I would like to hopefully find opportunities for our organization to work with your commission to bring together the legal mechanisms and the legal frameworks to implement what you're trying to achieve on a policy and economic scale.
Of course, it would be a pleasure to work together, and it's an honor to me to talk to such an important audience of lawyers, or the best lawyers in the world, I know. So congratulations for you, your organization, to the bar, and the best success with this quite interesting project regarding environment as a human right. I agree completely with that.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.